Kev, we've got you in the studio for at least an hour. I think an hour and 15, actually.
Yeah,
Let's keep you for 2. Because we're going to talk about the US. Firstly, how excited are you that they're finally here? Because, of course, there was a time, obviously last year, we thought they might not actually happen, but now we're less than a week away.
Really excited. I'm really excited to have fans present as well at games, because we weren't sure that was going to be the case. We weren't sure this was going to happen, because obviously it's been down to infection rates and it is still very complex. For example, Germany, I was talking to a journalist who's not going to be able to go to cover the games in Munich because he thought he was going to be able to, but Germany have said there can be no visitors from the UK or certainly from England at all. So there are complications for people, but I'm really excited that it's here. And I think, although France, for me, are the firm favourites, there are plenty of teams that can win it.
How much of home advantage do you think could count for England in this one? Bearing in mind, of course, there aren't going to be that many fans travelling anyway. And when England are playing at Wembley and it's going to be, 20,000, the majority are going to be English fans screaming for them as well.
Yeah, I think there's certainly an element of that. I think it's going to be a boost. And I think as well, what you've got to bear in mind is that these players have been playing in empty stadiums for months. So that vibe to have those fans in is going to be huge. And you can hear, like Champions League final, for example, you hear these crowds, 2,000 are making themselves sound like 20,000, 20,000 making themselves sound like 200,000. It's been incredible to have them back. And you saw that. I mean, I did a game at the end of the Bundesliga season, Union Berlin, and it was crazy. They had 2,000 in, and it sounded like, the Maracanã was full. It was unbelievable.
Logistically, what issues still have to be dealt with? Are there any? Or is everything pretty much lined up? Because these are exceptionally unusual circumstances, as we know. But I just wonder, with a tournament that's being spread over Europe, what other issues could we encounter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they are keeping an eye on the infection rates. They have to. And governments will try and be as accommodating as they can. But obviously, if there is a massive surge somewhere, then that's going to cause a problem. But they will have done all the preparation they need to do. The interesting issue is with the squads, because just today, a couple of the Swedish players, Dejan Kulusevski and Mattias Svanberg, have tested positive for COVID. So they're going to have to keep an eye on the rest of the players to make sure they don't test positive. So there are things in place to try and isolate players as much as possible. But Spain have just had Sergio Busquets pull out, at least for the first game, possibly for the second one as well. So they are regularly testing the rest of the players to see what will happen. And what they've done is the under-21s played against Lithuania. It was supposed to be Spain's final warm-up game tonight, and that hasn't taken place. The under-21s played instead. And they've called up a few extra players just in case, in a kind of parallel bubble, just in case they need to make some late changes. So look, that shadow of COVID is always going to be there. And there are always going to be issues where you have a player testing positive and suddenly you have to react really, really quickly. But I think in terms of preparation, there's nothing that will surprise UEFA, I wouldn't have thought.
Let me ask, I was listening to Drive Time today. Great show as well. It's not as good as Fridays. But they had Julian Laurent on. And Adrian Durham asked him what he thinks the level of football will be like. Because he said, and I agreed actually with Durham, that the 2018 World Cup, the level of football we saw was fantastic, because a few World Cups have been a bit, not a damp squib, but they've not lived up to the expectation we would have hoped they would have done. And Adrian said, he's really hoping that this one lives up to that one. Julian Laurent made a very good point. He said that he thinks quite a lot of the players will be tired because of how much football we've had in such a short space of time to get everything back on track. Do you think that will be a problem? Do you think that the level will maybe drop off a bit?
I think it could do. I think tiredness is a massive factor because you've had a very short turnaround between seasons. So you've basically had players who've had a really weird season when we had the lockdown in the middle of it. And so that season was split into two. And in some cases, Liga was obviously cancelled early. So players had months of not playing. So that was weird enough. And then you had a very short turnaround between seasons. And, it has been tough for these players. They are under physical strain. That's why UEFA decided to offer the 5 subs and decided to make the squads bigger. They've tried to make concessions in that way. I think coaches are just going to have to be really savvy, really clever about what they do. But ultimately, and this isn't a particularly, happy viewpoint, but ultimately the teams that are the most pragmatic, that can squeeze out results in very tight games, they're going to be the ones that do well. And that's one of the main reasons I think France should be favourites, because they've already done it.
And just on the back of that, we're going to talk about England's group in a second, but I just wonder, are certain leagues more likely to feel the tempo? That I'm thinking Premier League because of the pace of it, maybe the German league as well, or do you think that again, I'm thinking maybe a slower pace of game, maybe the Italians, could that have a factor on this or not?
I think the pace of Serie A has certainly quickened. And I think if you look at how many goals are scored, if you look at how open some of the games are, that's very much borne out there. I think the Bundesliga, they play fewer games than the Premier League.
Right, that could be a
they
factor.
also had very few midweek rounds. What was interesting for me as a Bundesliga commentator was that we expected, going into the season we've just finished, to have loads of midweeks. We were thinking, they're going to go kind of, usual weekend, then a set of midweeks. I think they had 2.
Right.
I think they had 2, and they found a way of, because games weren't really postponed very often, they found a way of getting through. Obviously, in the Premier League, it was totally different. And you had, a game on at midnight on a Thursday, not quite like that. But, you've got Burnley, West Brom at 3:10 on a Wednesday. It was all over the shop, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I understand why, because they wanted fans to be able to watch their teams play, because they couldn't be in the stadium. So I know that. But it was a bit disjointed, and it was a bit relentless. And I do wonder if it will have an impact.
Okay, let's kick off then with England's group. And I specifically asked for a document, something of that kind from you, Kev, about Croatia. We play them, of course, in the first game on Sunday. What will Southgate be looking at? What are their threats? We know the quality that they've got, in particular midfield. It's not the youngest midfield in the world, but don't underestimate the quality still. The way England should line up, there's talk of a 3, maybe a 4. What would you do? And, what have you got for us about Croatia?
Well, look, we know about the results they've had. Getting to the World Cup final was massive for them in 2018. They've not had great Nations League results necessarily since then. There has been a bit of criticism of the coach, Zlatko Dalic, for not bringing through what is seen as quite a promising young generation of players through quickly enough. Guys like Josko Gvardiol, who I think we're going to hear a lot of in the next few years. He's gone to RB Leipzig, very promising defender who was linked with Leeds, actually. And there is still a reliance on Luka Modric. He's still the best player by an absolute mile. He's still the creative heartbeat of the team. He's still the guy who sets the rhythm. So I think in terms of their setup, they'll go with what can change between a 4-2-3-1 and a 4-3-3. I think that's what you're looking at. In terms of the goalkeeper, I like him a lot. Guy called Dominik Livakovic, very, very solid, doesn't make many mistakes, good reflexes, good in one-on-ones, he does everything well. So I think he gives them a very kind of solid base. Rangers fans will know all about Borna Barisic, the left-back. Šibe Veseliko on the right-hand side is injury-prone, has lost his rhythm as a result of that, but can still be a good two-way player in that full-back position. Dejan Lovren's carrying an injury at the moment, so you're looking at probably Duja Cheleta alongside Domagoj Vida, and that's where I think England can cause them problems, because physically they're strong. There's a lack of mobility there, certainly with Vida. And I think
so that would then thinking what Gareth Southgate might be considering, he'd be considering pace in behind.
Yeah, get pace in behind, get players who are tricky around them. There's been a lot of talk about Grealish. Can he draw fouls? Can he win free kicks in dangerous areas? Well, that lack of mobility, you would think maybe he'll be able to do that. Midfield's the strongest area. I think Marcelo Brozovic is a fantastic player, has just helped Inter win the Scudetto over in Italy. Modric sets the tone. And then
is he the one, if you stop him, you stop them?
Yeah, I think if you disrupt him to an extent, yeah. But the issue you've got is that Brozovic is very technically gifted, obviously not as good as Modric, but plays a slightly different role. Kovacic probably the third one, but Nikola Vlasic, who Everton fans might remember, had a spell there that didn't really work out, but he's gone from strength to strength in the last year, 18 months or so, so he's a more attacking option. They've got real threats out wide, potentially. It depends how he goes, but Ante Rebic is a really good player. He's a hothead, he's passionate, he can be a player that gets himself into real trouble with referees, But when he focuses that energy and focuses that rage, sometimes he can be a real threat because he scores goals, he's competitive. On the other side, we know all about Perisic. Through the middle is an issue because I think they'll probably go with Bruno Petkovic. But I actually think Andre Kramaric, who plays for Hoffenheim in the Bundesliga, is a much cleverer player and a much better goal scorer.
Let me ask you, that game, of course, this England's opening game, live on talkSPORT this Sunday at 2 p.m. That game, England fans will go, yeah, we'll beat them. We'll beat them, of course we will beat. But you know a lot more about them. We'll beat them, of course we will. You know a lot more about them than most England fans do. So bearing in mind you know about them and you know about us, how do you see the game going?
I think if England can get the ball into the right areas and get the ball to their flair players, of which they have many, so it'll be interesting to see what combination he goes with, they should create chances. They should. But Croatia will not be an easy side to push over. I'm not sure they're quite as good as they were in 2018, but they are a threat. So I think if England play as well as they can play and create those chances,
we'll get a draw.
They can win the game. They really can win the game, but it requires a much better performance than I think we've seen recently from England.
We've got you, as I said, for another hour at least, and we're going to go through all the groups. We haven't really done England's group yet, but we'll go through it in more detail in just a moment. Just quickly, I wanted to ask before we started talking about it, but we haven't really covered any. Who do you fancy to win the whole thing?
France. I think they're the strongest squad. I think they have a really savvy coach. They have match winners everywhere you look. I would be surprised if they don't go really deep in the tournament. They're the winners for me, but there are 2 or 3 other teams that I think can win it.
Are you okay if people either phone in or tweet questions in for you about
why ever not?
About transfers. I mean, we're going to talk to you about Haaland a bit later on. £170 million, a bargain if you ask me. But we'll get your view on whether or not you think he's going to leave, etc. So, any questions you got for Kevin Hatchard, tweet me at AdiGolson05 or Jason Cundy05, or you're on Twitter. I
am on Twitter at Kevin Hatchard. Very imaginative.
We will find it. A reminder, of course, that every single game is live across the talkSPORT network throughout the tournament.
The Sports Bar with Andy Goldstein and Jason Cundy. Monday to Thursday night from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.